Imagine stepping onto an island where the wildlife has no fear of humans, where sea lions lounge beside you on the beach, giant tortoises roam free, and blue-footed boobies perform their signature dance just feet away. The Galapagos Islands are like nowhere else on Earth, a living laboratory of evolution and a paradise for nature lovers. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this special webinar on Vent's Galapagos Islands cruise aboard the Coral One. I am Ben Reynolds, producer and host of the Vent webinar series. Over the next hour, we'll take you on a journey through one of the most extraordinary destinations in the world. Today, you'll hear from our experienced leaders, see breathtaking images from past expeditions, and learn why this tour is a must for anyone who dreams of visiting this iconic destination. To get us started, I'd like to turn things over to Vent CEO Barry Lyon for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. And also, I want to thank our audience for joining us today. Before we get into the presentation, I did want to offer some introductory remarks because I feel so strongly about the Galapagos Islands. Vent has been operating trips to the Galapagos for probably at least 40 years. I myself have been on two different expeditions to the Galapagos, and it really is as epic a destination as exists. The wildlife, the legendary wildlife, so famous for how tame it is, the beauty of the landscapes, and of course the historical backdrop of science and the era of Charles Darwin and so on. With this particular trip that we're going to be describing this year, for departs in November later this year, we have assembled what I think is an all-star cast of tour leaders: Michael O'Brien, Louise Zemaitis, and Mark Garland. Michael and Louise are household names within the Vent leadership team, our tour leader team. Mark Garland, he works with us on a trip-by-trip basis, and he is a close friend and colleague of Michael and Louise. All three of them are from New Jersey. All of them have been involved for years with the Cape May Bird Observatory and New Jersey Audubon. Most recently, the three of them just led our annual tour to Antarctica, South Georgia, and the Falkland Islands. And it was a spectacular trip. And here they are coming back again for this trip this fall in the Galapagos Islands. I'm about to kick it back over to Ben here. But again, I just want to thank you all for joining us. And I do hope that this presentation gives you a feel for the Galapagos Islands. If you've not been there before, it really is a trip of a lifetime. It sounds trite or such a time-worn thing to say, but it really is. If you have been before, then you already know that, and you know that it's well worth a return visit. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ben.
Great, thanks, Barry, for those opening remarks. Now we're going to turn to Michael, Louise, and Mark, who we recently caught up with on their Antarctica cruise, to tell you a little bit more about their upcoming Galapagos cruise this November. Afterwards, we'll turn to Michael's feature presentation.
Hey, I'm Mark Garland, and we're on the Antarctic trip with Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours. And I'm here with Michael O'Brien and Louise Zemaitis. They've done a bunch of trips, including several to Galapagos. And the three of us are slated to lead the Vent trip to Galapagos next November. It'll be really fun for me because I have not been to Galapagos since 1999. But Michael and Louise have been there much more recently. Hey, Michael, what's one of your favorite things about going to Galapagos?
Penguins! No, we do see penguins in the Galapagos, and we see all kinds of other fun stuff. I love looking for seabirds. I love watching all those finches. And so all kinds of great things to look forward to. So looking forward to it.
All right. And Louise, how about you?
Snorkeling. I'm the snorkeler, among other things, of course. It's a great trip. We've been there many times, and we look forward to seeing our friends there.
Yeah, we hope some of you decide to come along. And Louise, what all do you see when you're snorkeling? What are some highlights? Too many, right?
Fishes. Yeah, sorry. It's just lots of tropical fish.
I remember cool tropical fishes and watching marine iguanas swim under the water, and
sometimes sea turtles.
Oh, yes, of course.
All right. Hey, so that's our update, and there in Galapagos, it's different from here in Antarctica. That's for sure.
All right, that was wonderful to catch up with them on their recent Antarctica cruise. So now we're going to turn to Michael's feature presentation, and afterwards, Barry will return for detailed information and offer a live question and answer session. So stay tuned.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk today about exploring the Galapagos Islands. It's one of my favorite places to go. It's just such a unique area, incredibly rich in natural history, absolutely breathtaking scenery, and just a wonderland for naturalists. There's no limit to photographic subjects for anyone who's a photographer. These are some just amazing scenes that you can see out there. So some of the birds you'll see out there, some of the wildlife might look familiar. Some maybe not quite as familiar. And some downright otherworldly. When you visit the Galapagos, one of the first things everyone will notice is how remarkably tame the wildlife is. And close-up encounters, such as this one with this waved albatross, are commonplace. Or maybe snorkeling with a Galapagos penguin. Or resting on the beach with some sea lions. Or some dolphins swimming right up to your panga. Or just walking right up to this incredible giant tortoise. So the tortoise is the foundation of the name of the Galapagos Islands, discovered back in 1535, and it was named the Island of the Tortoise. So the Galapagos lie on the equator. They're part of Ecuador, about 600 miles west of Ecuador, offshore in the Pacific Ocean. They are volcanic islands. They're on the north end of the Nazca Plate. And as this Nazca Plate has shifted eastward over the eons, over this hot spot, there's a hot spot of magma upwelling. And each island has been formed as the plate shifts over this hot spot. So the islands off to the east are much older than the ones to the west. So Fernandina on the west, one of the west islands, 0.7 million years old, whereas Española on the east side, 3.2 million years old. So these western islands, you see a lot more, they look like just volcanic rock, a lot of them, and the eastern islands much more worn down. Because these islands are so far offshore, insulated from outside influence, there's been a lot of endemic species have evolved there. So that includes about 33 endemic birds, 7 endemic mammals, 32 endemic reptiles, about 86 endemic fish, and around 1,200 terrestrial invertebrates, insects, and other things. And all sorts of other marine invertebrates, maybe 850 more species there, about 250 species of plants. So when I give you these numbers, bear in mind that this depends on the author or the current state of taxonomy. It certainly has been in flux over the years, and various scientists do some research and decide, well, this is a different species, or they may maybe discover a new one. Of course, the Galapagos were made famous by Charles Darwin, whose exploration of the islands led to his theory of evolution through natural selection, which is now a fundamental scientific concept, and really the key to our understanding of diversity of life. The sketch on the right is pretty cool. It's from his notebook 2 years after he visited the Galapagos, and it's really the first depiction of an evolutionary tree, the concept that one species evolves from something else. When Darwin visited the Galapagos, one of the things he noticed was the mockingbirds in particular. He had seen the mockingbirds on the mainland South America, and then he saw these different mockingbirds on the islands and noticed that they looked a little different from the mainland birds, and then also each island they looked a little different. And he also noticed that the tortoises from island to island looked a little bit different. When it comes to the finches, the famous Darwin's finches, Darwin didn't scrutinize them that much while he was on the islands. He actually called them blackbirds, grosbeaks, and finches. But when he got back, he passed on the specimens to John Gould, who identified them as a dozen new species. So it wasn't until later that they were actually referred to as Darwin's finches. There's been a long history of conservation on the Galapagos, going back to the 1930s, when the government of Ecuador declared the islands a wildlife sanctuary. And they later elevated that to a national park and then added a massive marine reserve around the islands. So today, about 90% of the land and marine resources are protected. The Charles Darwin Station on Santa Cruz Island is a driving force for conservation in the Galapagos. They conduct research and education, and their research focuses on restoration, invasive control, and sustainable development. It's also a wonderful place to visit for tourists and birders. We see lots of good birds on the grounds there. As you travel around the islands, you'll notice various habitat zones. The coastal zone is very narrow. It's really just the tidal areas. So beaches, rocky shores, mangroves. And then just inside of the coastal zone, you get right into the arid zone. So a lot of cactus and drought-tolerant shrubs. And so this is a fairly wide zone. As you get uphill, you start to get into the transition zone where there's more deciduous trees, taller trees. And then when you get up higher, you get into the humid zone. It's really a cloud forest, dominated by these Scalecia trees, which are giant sunflowers. And they're adorned with mosses and epiphytes. And it really is cloudy, misty up there. It's quite an experience being up there. And due to prevailing winds from the south, the humid zone extends farther down slope on the south side of islands. So now I want to go through some of the specialties of the Galapagos. One of the more conspicuous animals you'll see is the Galapagos sea lion. They're really all over the place in beaches, shallow water. Whereas the fur seal, the Galapagos fur seal, also is actually also a sea lion. So some people like to call it the Galapagos fur sea lion. They hunt in deeper water, so it's more rocky coasts that tend to be closer to deep water. They're a little darker in color, shorter snout, and more grizzled fur. We don't see a lot of whales in the Galapagos, but we do see them occasionally, and it's always exciting when we get to see one. There's a number of different species we've seen. And sometimes maybe you'll see it at a distance. Notice the spout on the the blue whale, this tall fire hose spout, the one on the bottom right, the blue whale, and the that 45-degree angle spout on a sperm whale on the upper right. It's much more common to see bottlenose dolphins. They'll often come right up to our boats, follow in the wake, ride the bow, so it's kind of fun. So reptiles are particularly conspicuous on the Galapagos. The marine iguanas are just everywhere along the coast, often in large numbers. They're the world's only seagoing lizard. Then they feed on algae in shallow water. And because they're feeding in salt water, they have to get rid of their they have to get rid of the salt. So you'll see them sitting on the beach and just every now and then snorting out seawater, this highly saline seawater. The land iguanas are much less numerous, and they're on several different islands. They're now split up into 3 different species. And it is believed that the marine iguana evolved from the land iguanas. So here we have the real monsters of the Galapagos, the giant tortoise, which can weigh more than 500 pounds. And depending on the taxonomist that you talk to, some of them are splitting it up. Each island with the different species. In fact, sometimes different volcanoes on one island, different species. So it is currently believed that there are 13 separate living species of giant tortoise. The Galapagos green sea turtle is another species that's very large. They actually can get to nearly 500 pounds as well. And they wander the seas, but they come to the Galapagos to breed. So sometimes they're visible in good numbers. Lava lizards might look big in this picture, but they're actually quite small. But brightly colored, beautiful little things. And there's at least 7 different species of those, all on different islands. So now to the birds. The white-cheeked pintail is a fairly numerous duck that we'll see. It's an endemic subspecies. It's widespread in South America, but the ones in the Galapagos look just a little bit different. A lovely little duck. Flightless cormorant is just a spectacular, weird, crazy-looking bird with those little wings. They don't really use those wings for much of anything. If you see how big the feet are, when they swim underwater, when they're fishing, they will tuck the wings in and just use the feet for swimming. Because the way the water currents are, there's the western islands are colder, and these flightless cormorants really prefer that colder area. So they're mainly in those western couple of islands. Another flightless bird, the Galapagos penguin, another just fabulous little bird to see. It's pretty amazing to see a penguin on the equator, or maybe even north of the equator. Unlike the cormorants, they do use their wings when they're underwater. So they basically look like they're flying underwater. And sometimes we'll get a chance to snorkel with these little guys, and then you can kind of see that up close. And if you don't snorkel, maybe a panga ride will get you up to where there's a penguin. Waved albatross, just a magnificent bird. It's what they call a near endemic. They breed almost exclusively on Hispaniola Island, and one of the oldest islands in the Galapagos. But there's a tiny population on another island off the coast of Ecuador, so not quite an endemic. But we'll often get to see them doing these wonderful courtship displays. They sort of bow and bill snap and bob their heads. Just really cool to see. They do look a little awkward on land, but when they fly, just magnificent in flight. Galapagos shearwater is a bird we see in good numbers, a lot of them in nearshore waters. Like a lot of seabirds, they're dark above and light below, the counter shading for camouflage. And they tend to have this fluttery flap, glide flight, generally low to the water. And we'll often see big numbers of them around sea cliffs where they nest. Galapagos petrel, another endemic species, a little bit harder to see. They breed up in the highlands, but they only visit the breeding sites at night. So during the day, they're mainly in offshore water. So it's when we get into some crossings between islands that we tend to have a better shot at seeing these guys. They're beautiful flyers, really languid wing beats and dynamic arcs through the air. So quite distinctive even when you see them at a distance. Storm petrels we'll see regularly right around our boats. They got their name because it looks like they walk on water like St. Peter. Really what they're doing is when they're feeding, they just pause momentarily and touch the feet down to give them a little surface tension as they pluck things off the water. There's 3 different species of storm petrels that we might see. Actually, a couple more that are rare possibilities, but 3 main ones. The Elliots on the left there is by far the most numerous one, and it's common close to shore. So we'll often see them when we're anchored near the beach. Wedge-rumped storm petrel in the middle is a little bit farther offshore, but still quite numerous. And we'll see quite a few of those. The band-rump storm petrel, which some people split that out into a different species, the Galapagos birds maybe being called the Darwin's storm petrel. They only visit their nesting areas at night, so sort of like the Galapagos petrel, it's one that we only see when we're out in sort of longer ocean crossings. And they look very similar, obviously. You can kind of tell them apart by wing shape and the width of the rump band, and then also their flight styles. Red-billed tropic bird, just a wonderful bird. They nest in these little nooks in sea cliffs, and you'll see pairs or little groups flying around in courtship flight, making these wonderful, raucous, screechy, almost tern-like calls. Just spectacular birds. Frigate birds are sort of ever present. They follow the ship. Sometimes they even sit on the rigging. We see 2 species which are tricky to tell apart. Magnificent frigate bird is the more widespread one. They're kind of on all the larger islands. The great frigate bird is a bit more restricted to some of the smaller islands. The males both have this big red, inflatable air sac on their chest. They're really hard to tell apart. You might see on the great frigate bird on the right has this brownish bar on the top of the wing. That's about the best way to tell the males apart. And here's the females, a little bit different pattern of white on the chest, but quite similar also. Boobies, we see 3 species of boobies. They're just wonderful birds to watch, especially when they're feeding. They're like torpedoes. They just sort of collapse their wings and plunge into the water. They can be 15 feet underwater in a split second by the manner of their plunge dive. So really, really cool to watch. These are blue-footed boobies here. Blue-footed booby on the left there is primarily a coastal species. They feed in relatively shallow waters right near the islands. The Nazca booby tends to feed a little bit farther offshore, and the red-footed booby farther offshore still. So they sort of split up the foraging niches that way. The red-footed booby, unlike the others, they actually nest in trees. They perch in trees. They sometimes perch on ships, whereas the other 2 do not do that. The blue-footed booby has been declining quite a bit recently. The main reason is a decline in sardines, which is their main food source. Gulls, there's 2 endemic gulls. The swallowtail gull is just a spectacular bird. They breed in sea cliffs, and they're primarily nocturnal when they feed. They go offshore and to feed on squid and fish that come to the surface at night. So sometimes maybe when we're cruising at night, you'll see a swallowtail gull following behind the ship. Just kind of appears from the blackness, this spectacular gull. The lava gull on the right is a much more solitary bird. You just see pairs here and there. It's actually one of the rarest gulls in the world, but they're scavengers and they're happy to come up near people to see what they can find to eat. So they're pretty easy to see, but really quite rare. I happen to live in a place where there's a lot of laughing gulls, and I can see the obvious similarity between the laughing gull and the lava gulls. Clearly, this bird evolved from laughing gulls. Similar vocalizations and certainly similar appearance, aside from this bird being quite dark. That's one common theme you'll see to a lot of the birds on the Galapagos, is that they're darker from counterparts on the mainland. And that's an adaptation to blend in with that dark lava rock. Shorebirds, there's quite a few species of shorebirds that can be seen in the Galapagos. The American oystercatcher is a resident there. It's actually a resident subspecies, endemic subspecies. But other shorebirds like the wandering tattler are migrants that come down from Arctic breeding areas. So we can really see a diversity of shorebirds there. American flamingos occur in coastal lagoons throughout the islands. It's the same species that's widespread in the Caribbean. And they fly freely from one island to the next. And they look incredibly gangly and weird in flight, but obviously they're pretty good flyers, the way they can get around. The lava heron used to be considered a full species, now is considered a subspecies of the striated heron. Sort of like the lava gull, it's sort of a slaty gray version of its mainland counterpart. This one has captured an endemic fish species, the Galapagos four-eyed blenny. So you'll see these lava herons along the rocky coast, just feeding in little tide pools and beaches. There's a couple species of rails that occur in the Galapagos. They're very hard to see, but occasionally when we're up in the highlands, we might see a paint-billed crake, which is a bird that's widespread on the mainland South America also. Or if we're really lucky, maybe the Galapagos rail, which is an endemic species in the Galapagos, looks a lot like a black rail. And these birds are up in the highlands in just kind of dense ground cover. We might see one dashing across the road or just in a little opening. So it's a bird we always keep our eyes open for when we're up in the highlands. Galapagos dove, common throughout most of the islands. Beautiful little thing, relatively small dove. The Galapagos hawk is widespread on many of the islands, not quite all of them. The adults are dark, the juveniles are streaked underneath. They remind me a lot of Swainson's hawks. That's very likely what they evolved from. Owls we will see occasionally. Short-eared owl and barn owl, both of these are endemic subspecies. And like a lot of things, are a little darker than their mainland cousins. Both will feed on really a variety of things, rodents and birds. The short-eared owl especially hunts storm petrels. So if you're near a storm petrel colony, you might see a short-eared owl lurking on the perimeter. Galapagos martin is a widespread but uncommon species, usually seen in pairs or small groups. They nest in little nooks and sea cliffs, but they forage. They roam far and wide to forage. So one of the reasons you always feel lucky to come across one. Dark-billed cuckoo is another species that is both on the mainland and out here on the Galapagos. Not uncommon, but sort of inconspicuous. Always fun to find one. Two species of flycatchers occur on the Galapagos. The Galapagos flycatcher is one of the Myarchus flycatchers. They're related to great crested or ash-throated, and they're small flycatchers. And then the bird on the right, the Brujo flycatcher, that's a recent split from vermilion flycatcher. And they look basically the same. The males are a little darker above, the females kind of brighter yellow underneath. And these birds are widespread, but they're very uncommon. So always a treat to find one. Sadly, there was another population of vermilion type flycatchers that were on San Cristobal, and they are now extinct. And that was recently also elevated to species status. So there had been two species of vermilion type flycatchers out there, now just one. Mockingbirds, there's 4 species on the islands. The Galapagos mockingbird at the upper left is on multiple islands, the central and western islands, whereas the other 3 species are only on those oldest islands. Each of the Floriana, San Cristobal, and Española each have their own mockingbird, and those happen to be the 3 of the oldest islands. All of these mockingbirds are remarkably confiding and will approach people without hesitation. Tourists are always warned to stay at least 6 feet from all wildlife, and of course never feed them. But it can be tricky with some of these birds, like the mockingbirds especially. They just hop right up to you, so you need to kind of back off and give them their space. Another bird that's just as confiding as the mockingbirds is the yellow warbler. This is an endemic subspecies. It's part of the mangrove warbler group, which is a non-migratory tropical group of yellow warblers, mainly coastal, but not entirely. These Galapagos yellow warblers are not just coastal; they're from the coast all the way up to the highlands, and they're pretty much everywhere we go. So just wonderful little birds. So the Darwin's finches, fascinating group. Sometimes downright confusing because there's they look similar. There's probably some hybridization going on. So they can be a little bit of a challenge to sort through. On my first trip to the Galapagos 15 years ago, there were 13 species of Galapagos finches recognized, and now there are 17 species recognized with various splits. And these fall into 4 different genera, and so that can be a helpful way to sort them out. Some are unique to one island or another, others are more widespread. And you generally sort them out by body size, bill shape, color patterns, and also feeding styles. So identifying these finches can be quite challenging and enough to make your head spin. But if you look carefully and just sort of patiently watch these birds, you might notice some slightly different feeding techniques. Here, a small tree finch is picking at some fallen fruit. And here, a large ground finch cracking a giant seed, probably bigger than any other finch could crack. And here, a common cactus finch eating some prickly pear fruit. And here, a vegetarian finch plucking some dried berries. And here, a woodpecker finch digging for bark beetles, very distinctive behavior. And I could talk for hours more about these Galapagos finches. I find it really fascinating, but that tends to put everybody to sleep. So I'll end it there and hand it over to Barry.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. And again, thank you all for joining us. What I want to do is the final part of our presentation here. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the trip broadly, but I do also want to talk about the ship and a couple of other things here as well. I'm going to advance a couple of slides. As you can see, our next Galapagos departure with these 3 fine leaders will be November 11 through 20 this fall. So we have about 9 months until departure. And this is going to be our cruise route here. And I want to spend a minute just discussing this because all visitation in the Galapagos Islands is tightly regulated by the Galapagos National Park, government of Ecuador, and so on. And the ships are, the different vessels that ply the waters of the Galapagos are required to adhere to specific programs. And we have some flexibility in the routes that we choose, but this is the one that we have settled on in recent years because we think that this is the best one. There is no one trip to the Galapagos that covers all of the islands. And I want to be clear about that because, in the old days, going back a decade or more, the ships had freer reign they had more latitude in terms of the places that they visited. It's more tightly controlled now, but regardless, we really like this particular program a lot. This is a map that shows the archipelago in its entirety. And in this very center of it, the large island in the center is Santa Cruz. This is where the Charles Darwin Research Center is. This is where the Galapagos giant tortoises are. And from there, you can see that we visit islands to the north and south and east. In the far southeastern corner, which would be the lower right corner of the map, is the island of Hispaniola. Its English name is Hood. You might hear that sometimes, Hood Island. No trip to the Galapagos, I feel, would be sufficient without going to Hispaniola Island. I have been there twice on voyages that I was on a number of years ago, and this is where you are just you're up close and personal to so many things. The wave. This is where the waved albatrosses are. Numbers of finches and mockingbirds and boobies and tropic birds and so on. Conversely, all the way at the very top of the map is the island of Genovesa. The English name for this island is Tower, and you'll hear it referred to variously in both ways. This is an island that many vessels do not get to, but it is, as I feel about Hispaniola in the south, Genovesa is so critical because the nesting seabirds, the sense of wilderness that you get being up there, and the big storm petrel colonies, it really is a wild experience. And then beyond that, San Cristobal Island in the east, Santiago and Bartolome in the north to the northwest of Santa Cruz. It's just a slam dunk itinerary, and this is the one that we have been operating in recent years, and barring any changes, we'll continue to do so moving forward. A little about the ship. We will be on the Coral 1 this year. There are two Coral ships, the Coral 1 and the Coral 2. The Coral 2 is a smaller vessel that we have used in recent years. I believe it accommodates approximately 20 passengers, including our staff. Well, 22 or 23, including our staff. For this particular voyage this year, with the leadership team we have, the 3 leaders we have, we opted to go with this larger vessel, the Coral 1, which is a 36 passenger vessel. We will take, I believe it's 32 or maybe 33 participants. And so what I want to impart with that is that 33 is certainly more people than 20 or 22, but we made this decision knowing that the sense of intimacy and the personalization you would want from a trip to the Galapagos is not lost, and the trip leader to participant ratio is maintained, ensuring a higher quality of experience. This is the deck plan. I don't know how useful you'll find that just sort of casually looking at this there in the audience, but there are several decks. The cabins are laid out, as you can see, in different places depending on the level of the ship that you would where you would choose to be. Here are a few. I'm going to follow here with a few images of the ship. This is one of the cabins. On the left is an artist rendition of basically the same thing. You can see that there are 2 different configurations here for those who prefer a twin bed configuration, for those who prefer to sleep in separate beds, or they can be put together for a single bed, what they call the matrimonial style, and as is represented in that image on the left side there. And there it is again. That's the matrimonial style. This is another one of the cabins. And here is another. As you can see, they're spacious. The beds are comfortable. And one of the things that I want to mention about the Coral 2 as I cycle through the program, here's the lounge. So I'll hold my thought for just a second, I guess, until I complete cycling through here. The beautiful sun terrace out and back. It's a wonderful place to begin and end your day. This is what the restaurant looks like. Single seating, meaning that everybody can sit at once. It's an appealing view off the back deck for those who would like to take their meals outside. That is done sometimes on some of the meals. What I want to say about the Coral is that, there are a lot of choices when you go to the Galapagos Islands. There are a number of companies, there are a number of vessels that ply the waters of the Galapagos. Many of the ones that are there are much larger, accommodating much bigger group, much larger size passenger groups. And so the sense of intimacy is reduced. Whereas in other situations, there are catamarans that some companies use. We like this yacht style. This is our preferred method for offering the Galapagos Islands, because you've got stability and you've got comfort and you've got high quality services. One of the questions that is sometimes asked of us is, what are the chances of getting seasick in the Galapagos? The chances are small. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but the chances are small. For one thing, when you're cruising among the islands, the waters tend to be more protected anyway. But secondly, that stability is ensured because of the type of vessel that we choose to operate on. And so the coral this year, but in other years, the coral too, the smaller coral too, both ships offer that. Now, another point that is well worth making here is that, the Galapagos Islands, of course, it is a special place for birds. It is a birding, and this is a birding trip. But at the same time, it is far more than a birding trip. There is so much to see and absorb and take in the Galapagos, ranging from the wildlife itself to different activities that are available. And the ship is equipped with different types of equipment for snorkeling and so on. And so it makes it possible for us to experience the Galapagos in more ways than only birding affords. One of the ways to get around, the main way to get into the islands is the ship comes in and everybody gets into a Zodiac, which in the Galapagos are known as pangas. Michael referred to this in his presentation. But the panga rides, take you from the ship to the shore and back, and they are really instrumental for the success of any Galapagos trip. Our time on shore on the islands does include a fair amount of walking. Sometimes you're just out on the open beach, whereas at other times you can experience boardwalks like at Bartolome Island, which this picture on the lower right is probably the lead up from the shore up higher to the pinnacle of the island, this long boardwalk. But also there are chances to be birding on foot on the island of Santa Cruz, where you're looking for the Galapagos tortoise and so on. Swimming, kayaking, snorkeling, all of these things are offered by the ship and its staff and crew. We always encourage, for those interested in getting into the water, we always encourage it. It is perfectly safe. The sites that are chosen are in shallow water. There is crew around. It is just a really integral part of enjoying the Galapagos Islands is to swim on scenes like this, where you are in the water with all these dazzling fish. People often see sea turtles. Sometimes the sea lions will come right up to you. That's not an exaggeration. As you can see on this image on the lower left, this person is snorkeling within just feet of a penguin. And to be clear, this is a product of the fact that the wildlife of the Galapagos is accustomed to being undisturbed. And so it allows for reasonably close approach. And you have scenes like this that take place on any Galapagos cruise. Our Galapagos Islands cruise, again, this fall, November 11th through 20th. Cabins begin at $99.95 per person in double occupancy from Quito. And on that note, I will say what happens is you fly to Quito, spend that first night, and then the next morning you take a flight from Quito out to the Galapagos Islands. We have not promoted this trip heavily to this point, but nevertheless, we have sold it pretty well. Their interest has been strong. However, we do still have 6 cabins remaining. We have until about 9 months until departure, so this trip will undoubtedly sell out. And I would say that if you have ever wanted to go to the Galapagos and have not yet been, or you have been but are itching to return, this is a one-time opportunity to experience it with these 3 leaders. I will say that we do offer the Galapagos in most years, not every year, but most years. And for a number of years running now, Michael O'Brien and Louise Zemaitis have been our primary tour leaders, along with a range of very excellent Galapagos guides. They're called Galapagueños. And this year, though, with the addition of Mark Garland, who is a superb naturalist. Mark is just is a supreme naturalist, a man who possesses massive information about the natural world. And so traveling with Mark is always such a pleasure and a rewarding experience for what is gained, for what is learned. On our side here in the Vent office, this trip is managed by Patrick Swaggerty. As you can see on the right side of the image of the slide, that is the contact information for Patrick, patrick@ventberg.com. There is our phone number. Patrick is assisted by Debbie Evans, and Debbie can help you also if Patrick is unavailable. However, I would just say that I do encourage you to, if you are considering the Galapagos this year, you've not yet made travel plans for the fall, this is a bang-up trip, and I can't recommend it too highly enough. Now, one of the other things that I want to, as we close here, one of the other points I want to make, what makes the Vent tour to the Galapagos so special is that we also offer pre-trips and extensions. This year, we offer a short extension on the northwestern slope of the Andes, and it is, I can't think of a more remarkable contrast than seeing all these amazing birds of the Andean cloud forest in complement to the wildlife and the birds of the Galapagos Islands. This region is a premier destination in South America. I have been down on the northwestern slopes a few times. Most recently, I was there in June last year, and I had a chance to spend a day with Paul on the northwestern slopes, and I was reminded how extraordinary an opportunity it is to see these bird feeders and feeding stations in different places with these incredible tanagers and toucan barbets and plate-billed mountain toucans. It really is just so sensational. The final point I want to make is this. Ecuador has been in the news quite a bit in the last couple of years. There was negative imagery associated with the country, primarily due to problems in the city of Guayaquil, some domestic unrest and so on. I want to be perfectly clear about this. Ecuador is perfectly safe to travel to. Vent is operating many tours, at 4 or 5 tours a year in Ecuador. We go all over, we go to numbers of parts of the country. There are no issues whatsoever with security or unrest. And it is really a shame that this imagery does exist around the country because it is fantastic. And as far as we're concerned with Ecuador, it's full steam ahead. So with that, I think I will kick it back to Ben. Is that right? Or are we going to take some?
Yeah, we're going to take some questions. And so for the audience, you can put your questions in the chat or the Q&A in your toolbar. And while you're getting those articulated and you want to write those to us, we're going to play a short video about or with the Coral 1 and Coral 2 to give you a feel for what this is like. Well, it looks like we haven't had too many questions come in, but if anybody thinks of anything, always reach out to me, Ben at ventbird.com, or Patrick at ventbird.com for questions about cabins, availability, logistics. So we would like to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the field on a vent tour in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.